People talk and think a lot about wanting to thrive. That is, to grow vigorously, flourish, prosper, or progress toward and realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. Yet, this can be difficult to do. Growth can be difficult because it requires us to encounter information we haven't before, get outside of the comfort zone of the known. And in that space, it's natural to make mistakes, guess incorrectly, be wrong, even be surprised by what happens. Now, there are all types of researchers and theorists who talk about why this is so good and powerful for us, how it helps us overcome our fears, gain skills, become safer in teams to help others grow. And a lot of it begins with curiosity. Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. Our intention for the Behaviorist podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we'd like to invite you into a conversation co-hosted by Maria and Carm of the Work Wisdom team about creating fertile soil for curiosity and pulling the weeds that overgrow and block growth. Maria, why does curiosity matter to you?
Well, it's interesting. My whole world is about learning, making mistakes, and guiding the process. I have, by way of profession, for the past 30 years, looked at this through the lens of education as a teacher, a principal, and a senior leader, ultimately leading leaders within organizations across the state of Pennsylvania. I have had opportunities to witness the innate curiosity of children as they come into school for the first time in the pre-K setting, and then also seeing the scale of which they grow as they exit the system and go into their post-secondary opportunities at some of the highest levels when they are in K-12. I've also had the pleasure of spending a good bit of time with adult learning in various leadership positions and roles. And curiosity matters because without it, learning becomes very limited. And I believe that with curiosity comes a lot of vulnerability, which we see a lot when we look at how little kiddos think and process the world. And then we see how we have to start teaching it a little bit more later in life because somewhere it seems like it gets lost in some places. So that's kind of my experience.
Yeah. That really resonates with me. And probably a part of that is because I'm a behavioral psychologist. So to me, everything's about learning and shaping our beliefs and how they affect our choices. I tend to help individuals and teams reflect on and explore this. And I find that when somebody can't be curious, it really shuts down their ability to learn, to try things. And trial and error is such a huge part of how we discover the world. If we can't try things, there are so many obstacles to learning. But inherently with that comes being wrong and making mistakes and having to think again about things and shift our stance as we encounter new information. Maria, what are some of the things that you've encountered that can set people up, either by making them too vulnerable to shutting down curiosity or not being curious?
There are a few things that come to mind. First of all, I feel like a couple different things. Learning for the first and foremost, learning takes time. Learning is a process. It is not something that you acquire knowledge and then you're ready to rock and roll with whatever that looks like. In some cases it is, but for the most part, especially when you're looking at how people learn and the importance of it, it takes time.
Yeah.
The second part of that is when you look at in terms of leading leaders, leadership is not a position. It's not a job description. Leadership is a process. It is an action. So with that comes curiosity, comes learning, comes failing intelligently and using failure to help move to the next step. Some of the barriers that I see when I'm working with leaders specifically is sometimes our tasks hijack our process. So we get bogged down with having to really get things done and want everyone around us to get things done and move the organization forward, whatever that looks like. That sometimes bogs us down. The second thing is sometimes expertise gets in the way, I have found. We put on the armor of having to know everything so that we can help other people to get the task done. And then it gets in the way of really being able to be curious and problem solve and explore. And the other barrier that I find a lot of times has to do with the fear of punishment or consequence. If I make a mistake as a leader, how does that influence everyone else in their ability to do what they need to do? And how do I then recover from that and help an organization to recover? So that fear sometimes, I think, really is a barrier to allowing that exploration and curiosity to happen, which then limits the learning.
You're saying a lot of really important things here, so I'm kind of pinning some of them in my mind. I'm thinking about first it taking time. And when it takes time, we're navigating these pressures of how to move things forward. And, when those pressures are like shareholder revenue or outcomes so that we can move to the next outcome, everything's so fast paced and probably only getting more so with everything from our 24-hour news cycle to social media and how quickly things go viral. And there's just this go, go, go mentality. And I think we started to question that during the pandemic, like, wait, is this always working for us? And I don't know if you found this in the return back to more kind of traditional ways of doing work since the pandemic, but are you finding people are trying to kind of go back to normal and jump back into the hustle?
So I find that, it's interesting you say that, I find that certain organizations, companies evolved with the pandemic. They realized they have to invest in their people. If you don't invest in the people in your organization, you're losing really good people. Mm-hmm. I do feel as though education is kind of that consistency. Yeah. For families a lot of times. Mm-hmm. I think that it's harder to be flexible with the structure, but I do see that the areas that are thriving are those areas that are willing to not look and say, we're going to go back to the way it was, we're going to start here, and we're going to move forward. For example, there were a lot of schools and districts prior to the pandemic that were not technologically ready for what would, putting an entire school district online, et cetera, starting in kindergarten. And that had to happen. So that has happened. So now accessing technology is not the issue anymore for some it still is. It's now, what do I do with this? Mm-hmm. And how do I use this as a tool? I don't need to teach this anymore. I need to use it. And I think that, for the most part, we're moving with that. I think organizations that are really investing in that adaptability and the flexibility and the ability to look at the people who are involved in their organization and understand that those people bring an expertise and they want to use it and they want to be able to think and learn and explore and make mistakes and have that safety to do so, are the ones that are thriving at this point.
Oh,
it's kind of heavy.
Man, you are saying so many good things. I'm like scribbling down notes as you're talking. So one of the things that stood out to me, so I have lots of mental pins here, but progress and innovation being critical. Life is demanding it of us. We're not like walking into some aspects of life going, gee, I hope I have to innovate. But then things happen like the pandemic, and it's an opportunity to either resist that innovation or engage in progress towards innovation. And that key word, it's like in all caps here, is adaptability. If we can't adapt, but adaptation is not some linear, straightforward thing, right? It's such a neat, pretty word we can say, like adaptation, but it looks like a mess. It looks like trying things and things not working, and us having to be in, like you were hinting at already, that vulnerable space of what are we going to do here? How are we going to make these adjustments and adapt to the current environment, and what resistance might show up?
It's very interesting, if I can just quick interject. I think we lived a long time in the information age. Information was the commodity. It was what was going to fuel everything forward. More information is going to move us forward. We're no longer there. Information exists. Now we have to figure out what information we're going to use to do the next thing. And in the doing part of it, that's where it can get a little messy.
This is such a good point. How do we become good consumers of information? And, I think that the pandemic and being locked in and starting to look at algorithms and media literacy and all of that has been a real impetus for this, because like you're saying, we now have access to every perspective, but now we need to build our wisdom and discernment. How do we know what is important to be actionable and what may be misguided, incomplete, stuff that we may separate out the wheat from the chaff.
And then circling back to the need for the investment in the human interaction. So I visited the Mayo Clinic in April, their innovation center in Jacksonville, Florida, and they talked about that. They talked about the fact that human interaction is the new commodity, because we can choose now who what part of our organization we want to hold on to in terms of making sure that human interaction and those relationships happen. So if you're in the medical field, there are certain parts you don't want to give up because you have to have that interaction with your patient. If you're an educator, there has to be interaction with the people within your organization. So the human interaction comes with that innate want to be curious and ask questions and question things. So how do we foster that through our leadership?
Yeah, that's making me think of other conversations we've had here on the Behaviorist podcast, because information isn't in a vacuum. Curiosity, asking questions, isn't in a vacuum. It's housed in context and relationship. And so if we're then using that to help cultivate our wisdom, that is circling me back to one of your points, which was expertise sometimes inhibiting our ability to problem solve and get curious and slow down, because we are so connected to what we already know, the expertise that we've built, that we can sometimes forget that we had to grow into our expertise. We have limits to our expertise, and that there are other perspectives on the very things that we are exploring or living into with our expertise that may benefit from other people's perspectives. That reminds me of the concepts in growth and fixed mindsets. So let's talk about that for a moment. A fixed mindset, by definition, is a belief that you have a certain amount of ability, an attribute, a knowledge base, that maybe a high level, maybe a low level, that is like existing and resistant to change. And so if you're in a fixed mindset, you are more set up to avoid challenges and stick with tasks that are kind of already in your wheelhouse, already feel easy and safe to you. Run from setbacks, hide your mistakes or worry about your mistakes, and avoid asking for help because you may reveal some deficiency that you have in your knowledge base. Whereas a growth mindset is the belief that although you may already have started or cultivated a particular level of ability or an attribute, knowledge base, you can develop that further. And so a growth mindset would invite you to take on challenges, become more resilient in the face of difficulty because you're approaching it through the lens of what can I learn from this? You're adapting and learning intentionally from mistakes and using other people as mentors, resources, sources of input, and their own contributions.
Carol Dweck has something also around growth mindset that stood out to me when thinking about that. And I've really tried to be mindful of this when I'm working with leaders. And she had talked about growth mindset helping people take on and persevere challenging tasks. Yeah. But it also overlaps this with making sure leaders create a psychologically safe environment in order to do so, because then it makes it easier to not only ask questions but question answers. Yes. And really and looking at how we are vetting our information, creating that environment to be able to do that for people who are professionals in their organizations, and really focusing on the learning part of that is
can we really highlight important. A couple of things here? You're saying ask questions and question answers. Boom. Okay, so just a shout out here right now. We are talking about the work of Carol Dweck and Elaine Elliott Moskwa. They are the growth mindset people. So they've got lots of articles and books and resources out there, but little shout out there for a second. So you have talked about a story that you were reading about applying this fixed and growth mindset mentality shift, and I'm wondering if you're willing to share it with us.
Sure. I read a book, When You Wonder You're Learning. It's all about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and basically all the lessons that he taught around being creative, curious. And obviously he focused on children. That book is actually by Greg Beer and Ryan Radusky. And they're based in Pittsburgh also, where Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was filmed. Yeah. So one of the things that they talk about a lot is that Fred Rogers himself, talked a lot about choosing learning over knowing. So I think about that in terms of leadership. We're kind of expected to know when you're a leader. Or that's a pressure that potentially you put on yourself. But his whole view was choosing that learning over that knowing. And in that, if you think about it, if you've ever watched his show, he talked about the neighborhood all the time, right? It was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But really, it kind of goes back to what you said, Carm, about the fact that it wasn't really a neighborhood. It was a safe environment. It was more of an environment, a psychologically safe environment to ask questions, to question things, to make mistakes, to acknowledge our mistakes. And then what do we do with that? So the example I had was when I was watching a video not too long ago, and every time he would come in and he'd sing "Won't You Be My Neighbor," as he was coming in to start the show, he would take off one sweater and put on another sweater. And The one time he put his sweater on, he buttoned it incorrectly. And just listening to him say, "Oh, have you ever done that? Have you ever done that? Have you ever buttoned your shirt wrong? Let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to unbutton it, and then I'm going to button it again and do it the right way." And that's okay, because everyone makes mistakes sometimes. There was no shame in that. Mm-hmm. I think leaders put a lot of shame with not knowing or not doing something correctly the first time. So he created that safe environment. It was all about wondering. When you wonder something, you learn. I think about, a lot of my work has been with kids. And also in the book, it talks about the fact that little ones, when they first start to speak, so you're thinking like 12 months, 14 months of age, they start to say words, they start to process things. Everything's a question. They question everything. We as parents are sometimes looking at them like how many more questions do you have today, right? But they'll question why the sky is blue, why that car does that, why, and it's why, how. When they get to school, sometimes that changes, because we are still in that, and even in our families, we are very much in that information, like we need to get certain things done. I think of even my own children, that sometimes happened when they were little, where I'm like, okay, listen, we don't have time for 1,000 questions because we have to get the groceries in the car, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he talks about the fact that happens, and then we want to go back and teach adults how to ask questions again.
Yeah.
So how can we keep that environment going where we as leaders, I feel like that's one of our biggest responsibilities, is to actually create the environment for learning to happen for adults.
Yeah.
So that's some time that I think we would need to spend really unpacking that.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a pin in that for us to unpack that in a second, because I think that's a really critical place this conversation can go. But I want to respond for a moment to you talking about where we learn this shame or this pressure, like we already have to know things, and how, there are subtle and explicit places that we encounter this that somehow we have to already be good at. And I watch my 5-year-old like this. She has a little mini child-sized Fender electric Stratocaster, and she picks it up to try to learn because she wants to be very rock and roll. And when she can't produce the sounds with her little fingers, that will take a ton of body memory practice to get these motions down, there's all this emotion that shows up with it. She's frustrated, she's disappointed, and she can verbalize those things, but there's nothing to do with it. There's no way to fix or solve that. It is a frustration and discouragement or disappointment that has to come with the practice.
Right.
And that can be her catalyst to continue to practice. Okay, I haven't gotten this motion down yet, and I want to be able to make that sound. How do I keep learning, keep trying, keep practicing? And if we can help her get into that mentality, she can build resilience, but it's not to remove the difficult feelings that come with the learning and growth process. And so I think one of the challenges that shame, all of these emotions that feel more aversive. We don't like sitting in embarrassment, sitting in uncertainty. But cultivating the ability and willingness to do that becomes really critical, because if not, we either give up the task, we shut down the learning process, right? And if she does that and never learn, right now we're more in the part of the process where she's actually just learning to hold the emotions when they get triggered. But as a clinician, I work with so many people, and as a coach and leader, I've worked with so many people that had not gotten past that point. And so when those emotions show up, they either give up the task or they push through and move on. They try to hide the parts they haven't hewn yet. And so this is inhibiting our learning and our curiosity, because instead of going, oh, I wonder if I could move my finger a different way to hold that string different, to got it, we would be shutting down that process too early.
And I wonder then, as leaders, what that models to the rest of the people who we are trying to lead. if we're not able to process through some of those emotions and understand that right now that is shame because there was a mistake or an error. I think of Amy Edmondson's book, The Right Kind of Wrong, and The Science of Failing Well. Just the title of that book, The Science of Failing Well. How many of us have just sat with that for a little bit?
Yeah, so let's get into one of our favorite people, Amy Edmondson, who has books and concepts like The Fearless Organization. Psychological safety is her thing, and her most recent book, The Right Kind of Wrong. All are bringing us to the concept of psychological safety, how she's developed it, how it plays out in organizations, why it's so critical. And the idea is that for an environment to be psychologically safe, there need to be components that allow us to learn and grow, make mistakes, not have to hide those mistakes, and be able to almost have our expectations in the workplace or in, I would argue, even our friend groups and our relationships and all of that, to have the expectation that failure is going to be a part of it, that mistakes will be a part of it, that uncertainty will be a part of the process, and that we set the stage for safety and growth to be possible by setting that as the tone, rather than the expectation to be that we don't make mistakes because mistakes are annoying or they're hazardous or all of the things that can set a tone to bury or shame or hide the shame and embarrassment.
And I also wonder, based on that, and then really you're saying a lot of really deep things that I think that we really, when we think about leadership, we really need to cultivate in people, because we see the potential. And many times we see the potential in the leader, we see the potential in the organization. It's like, how do we get to that next step? Some of that has to do with being able to make mistakes. Some of that has to be with cultivating curiosity and learning. Because I think in the end, if we don't do that, and if we don't spend the time doing it, we're going to lose some of our best thinkers because they don't have the space to be that or to do that. So we lose our best thinkers if they don't have that voice in that space.
Of course.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting when we think about our expectations, like what's the progression of this? It's almost like we want to innovate, we want to have progress, we want to be great, we want to excel, we want to have quality, and we want to nail it the first time. And look, that's like awesome, right? The Olympics are going on right now. You know, not a single one of them has nailed the thing that they wanted to do the first time they do it.
Exactly.
You know, and now they're, you know, the epitome of their sport. But it's almost silly that we go into different tasks, different challenges, different goals, and want ourselves to be able to nail it the first time we're doing something. And yet, that's kind of the implicit message, right? Because then if we don't nail it the first time, the self-criticism or criticism of others can go in, the sidelining of others, like I'll just have somebody else do it, right? And these are some of the processes that can shut down the creative thinkers, the people going, maybe we could try that a different way. I'm not sure that your idea is the only idea here. Leader blah 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 of said project.
And I think we have to really, really focus on that. I think we really need to focus on the ability to pivot, the ability to navigate, the ability to not get what you want the first time around, and then say, what do I do with this, and how did I learn from this? I'm going to give an example. I have 3 children, and they're all in college. So watching their minds try to navigate their next step is really interesting, and they do it very differently. And I can say that, like, my youngest, when he came to me and said, you know what, I want a different experience. and I want to figure out what I want to do. He transferred from one college to another, and watching him actually navigate that, because he was successful in his first attempt. Mm-hmm. But his response was, I want to be more successful. I want it. I want more out of this. Mm-hmm. So, and then saying to me, I need this to work for me. And I'm like, wow, that's really deep for where you are in life. Whereas some of my other children, it's like, I'm going to go through this, and then I'm going to figure out what I want to do with it. And they navigate it. They're navigating just in a different way. Mm-hmm. So looking at that as a leader also, and saying, okay, I have 3 minds here that are working 3 different ways, or I have 400 minds working 400 different ways, depending on the size of your organization. Really spending some time in developing that environment for them to say, oh, this might be a great idea, but it also might not be. How can we cultivate this?
Yeah, because we want to draw the best and brightest to our organizations, and yet sometimes we act like we want our best and brightest to only ever be their best and brightest, right?
So true.
Not to be tangential, but this is making me think of Simone Biles and how when she was self-aware enough to know that she was hitting some challenging mental, emotional, physical parts of her career, she said, I need to take a step back and take a break from this. And people raked her over the coals for it, and acted like this was going to ruin her career. And now we have hindsight bias, right? Because we've just finished another Olympics where she has been, incredible. And a part of her story has been honoring herself, self-reflecting, living into some of those things so that she could grow. And that takes a lot of courage. And that, this is, I guess, part of one of our accidental takeaways today is that curiosity requires vulnerability and courage. Like, if we can cultivate the ability to hold all that tension, that uncertainty, that difficulty, there is so much potential there.
Absolutely.
But we can't shortcut it.
Right.
We can't jump to the end where the success happens, and our over-eagerness can actually thwart and sabotage the whole process.
Absolutely. That's huge. That is absolutely huge when I think about how we approach just people and learning, curiosity. They all involve relationships. A relationship, and even if it's to your example, a relationship, knowing yourself. Yeah. And being able to understand where you don't need to know, you need to learn. And you're going to learn from somebody who potentially you're supervising, right? There have been so many conversations. And again, being in education, you learn an awful lot from the kids themselves, because they have no problem telling you exactly what they think when they think it, which is, it's invaluable. Because there have been times when the best laid plans, I can tell you, I was teaching 5th grade years ago, and I had a plan that I spent a ton of time on. And I had a kid, and it was based on a book, and I had a kid come in and put the book on the table and said, okay, this is about conformity, this is about this is about this. Okay, what's your plan for this? Like, he read the whole book in one night and came in and was ready for the next thing. And I'm like, well, all these plans I just made, we're going to put those over here and we're going to start again, Yeah. But kids will tell you. I think that sometimes we, as adults, are we've been so conditioned. And it goes back to some of those barriers, the fear of consequence, the fear of your expertise getting in your way, all of those things that really kind of inhibit that. So taking those next steps, taking the first step to create that environment and to understand you and understand the people around you, I think is really huge. Yeah.
I'm finding myself a little distracted. A story just popped into my head. And I'm thinking about humility and how this process can be humbling for us as leaders. And if we want to grow and excel and create the companies and organizations that we really want to be, cultivating our own humility is a huge part of the process. So, little shout out to my friend Maisha, because I'm about to share a story from her. Surprise. I had recruited her from another place to come work for the hospital that I was running at the time. And I was trying to really purposely think about gaps in our staff and how to bring in people that had those strengths, those, skills, that awareness, perspectives to try to make us more well-rounded, and then kind of have team meetings and things where, we could learn from each other and stuff like that. And, I was having a day where I was maybe feeling a little proud of myself for that. And, she called me out a little bit, not a little bit. She called me out that, don't think that this has done it. Don't think that this has achieved it, because there is a lot of work here still to do and a lot of really growing pains that still have to happen here. So And the humility it humbled me really quick. Not to say that we shouldn't celebrate when, we look around and see we were moving in good directions, but that it reminded me that if I'm not going back to the front lines constantly, the people doing the work, the perspectives that I need, and I'm over here thinking I'm doing great or whatever, there is stuff that we need to thrive, and we need to be open to hearing when there's still a lot of work to do and we have not nailed it yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then not looking at that humility and then shaming yourself as a result and getting stuck there where now I have to go back and take another first step. It's no, this is just the point that you're at.
Yeah.
Here's your reality testing. And now let's move.
Yeah.
Right.
Humility as not humiliation.
Right.
And too often I think people get stuck there, right? They're humiliated by these moments, but being humble I wish I had the definition of humble. I did not prep that. But we have this ability to actually get honest.
Yes. And I think we ask for honesty. I don't know that we're always ready for honesty.
Did we just accidentally circle back to psychological safety? What?
I think we did.
So, because that's a huge part of psychological safety. When the environment we've created or are contributing to isn't psychologically safe, people will hold back their honesty because they feel shut down, they feel silenced, they feel afraid they're going to be punished. And in part, that's because we're not demonstrating humility. We're not asking good questions, and we're not showing that we're really listening. So we have set up the environment to make it seem empty, or like it's just words or some motion we're going through, or even that we could punish, like you brought up earlier, but that's critical to this. If people think bringing up mistakes or alternative perspectives is going to be punishable because the leader is going to be humiliated and can't handle and tolerate that, then your best and brightest are going to start withholding themselves and their voices.
Absolutely. And it kills anything that you're thinking could lend itself to any type of curiosity or learning.
Yeah.
It stops it right there.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then we could end up being in the position where when a big mistake happens, we go, how did this happen? Like it's such a shock, when we've been creating an environment or contributing to an environment that really was a setup.
And I wonder if we spent a little bit more time on the front end creating that environment and allowing those mistakes to happen along the way. Because how many times do we then spend more time fixing the mistake down the line and then trying to create an environment at the same time, and you're spending even more time on that.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. It does not save us. Creating the environment is a critical part. I think you said to me earlier that creating that environment is our top job as a leader.
I would agree.
Well, I
Create
think you're
the
the one that said it. So.
Yeah, I did.
But, I wrote it down because I was like, damn, yes, like that's exactly it. And, I'm in healthcare, so I think about high reliability organizations. And, that set of principles came out of issues in aviation that were leading to, injuries and crashes and deaths. But then healthcare has adopted it through stuff like the Joint Commission, because we've realized that, these can be life and death sometimes.
Absolutely.
But some of the principles of high reliability are things like, drawing from the expertise of your team, the frontline people, and really, leaders not being the keepers of all knowledge. And
That's
yet,
big.
I hear a lot of companies and organizations saying that they want to be highly reliable, but in those micro moments, that's the leader having to hold their mistake.
Or rely on someone else.
Yeah.
To complement a weakness that a leader would recognize in themselves and say, you know what, here's this person who has the expertise on my team. Let's let them run with it. And I'm here just to support, and knowing how to navigate back and forth between those kinds of situations.
Yeah.
I think about sometimes when we talk to our kids, when teachers specifically talk to students, and then also parents when you get home. And I wonder if you do this with your daughter, but you ask the question, I did it with my kids all the time, what have you learned today? Right? And, 2 of the 3 would always tell me something that they learned, and the third one would make something up that was absolutely false every time. But that was a question, a standard question. What'd you learn today? So I wonder if we asked leaders that, or we asked professionals that more often, starting out a meeting with, what's the last new thing you learned? Even if it's around something that you're working on, a project or something, but what's the last new thing you learned? And see what adults come up with.
Yeah.
Because I think just cultivating that, I don't know that I think we talk about cultivating it. We talk about what it could be as a result of cultivating it. But to your point, asking some of those questions, questioning some of those answers, and then also, like, what is it that you learned? What did you learn from this project? What are you learning along the way? What didn't you know before you came in here is gigantic. And I think sometimes we put that into like an induction program or an onboarding program, but we don't really cultivate that throughout. And I think that's something we need to spend a little bit more time on.
And it starts with us, right? That we model this. So, what an important takeaway that we could have, the closeout of our own day be, what is something that I learned today? And then starting to model that. I think about when I make mistakes, I try to make them out loud to my daughter. So I will say to her, today at work, I did this, and then I needed help from this person. What was something that happened for you? Because I want her to see that adults do this, that, people that are all around her all are making mistakes, and that it doesn't stop there. It's not like you make the mistake and then you're bad and then that's the end. But like then we get help, or we learn more and find out more, and then we figure out what we're going to do next.
I think you just talked about maybe a new podcast on how do leaders ask for help.
Or at least an episode. You want to make another episode with me on how do leaders ask for help?
Let's write that one down.
I know,
because
right?
I think if we think about that, and we think about focusing on the learning over the knowing, there's an innate need for help and how to navigate help and be okay with that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think some of that is, when people ask for help, oh, this one gets so tricky. I'm sorry, my psychologist hat is on right now, because this starts when we're young. Sometimes when we are young and we don't necessarily have a safe home life, we ask for help and we don't get it. Or we ask for help and bad things happen. And, we learn things like self-sufficiency from that. But we don't necessarily think that at some point, even if it's as adults, because sometimes we carry that wounding around for a while, but eventually as adults, like the people who will be listening to this podcast, we have an opportunity to say, do I have to stay there? Do I have to stay in the place where I believe that it's going to be unsafe for me, that someone will shame me, scold me, punish me, downgrade me, do something harmful to me because I ask for help? Or will I have people who are willing to come alongside me, partner with me? But then we also, as leaders, have to be the one that comes alongside. Not in a way of I told you so, not in a way of, yeah, that's right, you did need my help, or you came to the right place, but in that much more humble, empathetic, compassionate, let's try this together kind of thing.
Yep, absolutely.
Oof. So one of the things that this makes me think of is another amazing book by another one of our work wisdom favorites. So we've already talked about Amy Edmondson, but I would say one of our other favorites is Adam Grant. And his book, Think Again, is probably one of my favorites of all time, of all books I've ever read, because it's encouraging us to consider the things that can get us stuck in everything from confirmation bias, the things that we can get really entrenched in our opinions, our perspectives, more likely to preach them and push them onto other people than to hold them with openness and curiosity. And he has 30 recommendations for where to start in the back. But I think that we could highlight a few of them as a part of some of this. He talks about thinking like a scientist, which I think means I believe from how he's wording this is holding our opinions like hypotheses. So we're allowed to form opinions, that's a natural part of navigating and interacting with our world. But when we hold them like a hypothesis, there's space that maybe this will pan out. Maybe I'll encounter new information and I'll find something else didn't pan out. As a researcher, there are times I've formulated a hypothesis or done so with a team, and it has been just like blown out of the water. And it's like, wow, that really didn't work the way we logicked and intuited that it did. And we find that there's limits to our logic and our intuition, tons of them. And so we don't just guess correctly about everything, which is why there's diversity of perspective in the first place. But if we are holding these things flexibly, then we can approach them like they're new opportunities to incorporate new information in instead of threats, right? Now it's not my opinion got rejected, my opinion's wrong and bad. And instead it's like, oh, well, that doesn't totally work that way. Huh. Well, let's get some new thoughts here. So that can encourage us doing intentional perspective taking from alternative perspectives.
Asking new questions, developing new questions from the hypothesis. Questions come out of hypothesis as opposed to making it so finite and this is how we do things here.
Yes.
Right?
We're not just tacking down, this is how it works and it has to work that way. And so it's almost a shift in how we define capable. Because rather than saying I am capable and competent because I know all of these things and I can execute them in a particular way, now we're saying I'm capable because I can flex with new information as it comes and be competent in my approach to how I respond to that. by drawing from my team, by partnering, by getting creative, or eliciting other people's creativity, by figuring out together, right? All of these things that make a lot of space for us to be wrong and retool and be flexible and shift, and where we kind of can't do that if we're still in that fixed, rigid mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about a couple others of his, highlight a couple more, because I think it'll be a really great takeaway for our listener. He highlights the benefits of doubt and embracing the joy of being wrong. And when we can see doubt as an opportunity for growth, not doubt as second guessing and insecurity, which is a lot of times what we think about doubt. And so doubt becomes very threatening. Instead, if we frame doubt as openness and willingness to kind of have a clear head and open eyes, then questions don't have to be as scary and threatening. Doubt doesn't have to be scary and threatening, because maybe we'll just find that things are working in the way that we originally were flowing in, but maybe not. And so we're just allowed to question, right? Where did the rule come from that we're not allowed to have doubt? And yet we can get really caught up in doubting ourselves and trying to not doubt ourselves and others. Again, not to the point where it becomes that we have to always be on shifting sand and never have something to stand on, but where we can say there is space for this. And if I ask questions, I can encounter more information. I can use wisdom, discernment, multiple perspectives to figure out what hypotheses I want to hold and how I want to land. And if I incorporate, or if I encounter new information, I can incorporate that in too. So doubt becomes opportunity. And then we can find joy if I'm wrong, but it's no longer threatening. Now it's an opportunity. There can be gratitude. There can be like, oh, well, I really needed to know that. And now I'm getting to know that.
And it will segue right to innovation and new thinking and new opportunities to explore together. That's what it looks like to create that. I believe.
Not to get into social psychology for a second, but I'm thinking of upward and downward social comparison and how we can almost like in our minds, we can force rank each other sometimes. And so if that person knew more than me, we can almost make it like they're better than me instead of it being they were willing to share this thing they knew with me. What a precious gift. And so no wonder it would be threatening then to have somebody else know more, because now they've just bumped up in status to me. But what if we can see it as the gift that they were willing to share, a share of themselves, of their mind, of their heart, of their prior experiences, and now I can benefit from their gift.
That's beautiful. Think of how the world would go around.
Well, I mean, that's why we're talking about this, right?
I think that's huge, yeah.
And so we have talked a little bit, but tune into our other behaviorist podcast on asking better questions, because some of this is asking questions that have new depth, new connection, where we're not just leading because we already have a conclusion in mind and we're just trying to have somebody see our side, our perspective. So it makes me think of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which Grant and many others have talked about. It's pretty interesting. But for those who haven't heard of it, it's this idea that when we know a bit about something, there is this human tendency to be almost like so enthusiastic about this information and knowledge that we have that we can overestimate our expertise in it. And so it creates this curve where people that know a bit really can highly estimate themselves in their knowledge and competence. And then as people gain knowledge, that curve drops steeply, where people in the middle who are really gaining knowledge start to estimate themselves and their abilities and all of that, their ability to apply it much, 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 much lower. And then just at the end, where people are developing serious expertise, does the curve start to dip up again. But not quite far, not nearly where the person with just a little bit of knowledge and experience is. And so it's interesting to me to think, one of the barriers we're highlighting here, this defensiveness, may be a part of novice, not expertise, that I'm self-assured and overly confident because I know just enough to be dangerous, but not know enough to really hold what I know and I don't know.
And sustain.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
That reminds me, because there's so many lessons to learn in Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Right?
We love
and
Ted
I know
Lasso.
Work Wisdom loves Ted Lasso. So what you described to me, I just couldn't help thinking about Ted Lasso coming in to coach soccer. And never, if the listeners haven't seen Ted Lasso or know about it, Ted Lasso was a football coach in America and was brought over to England to coach a soccer team. He knew nothing about soccer. It was very clear very early on in the series that he didn't know much about soccer. But what he did know was how to coach. Yeah. And what he did know was how to build an environment. And what he did know was his responsibility to make his players the best version of themselves. Mm-hmm. And he was very, very confident in that. And not everything went well all the time. And there's so much to learn from how he was resilient and how he acknowledged mistakes and how he brought the strengths of each person that he came in contact with to the environment where they could grow and thrive. And thus the team grew and thrived throughout the series. And of course, the famous scene, the dart scene, where he was playing darts and talked about being curious and not non-judgmental. Mm-hmm. And there was a lesson to be learned there. But what a great takeaway.
Yeah.
It's about being curious. It's about living in your confidence, but then at the same time understanding that the learning is happening when you're not in that confidence.
Yeah. I love that point. And, Ted Lasso's a really interesting example of that. I think about how when we acknowledge that there's something we don't know, we get really afraid that eliminates all of our knowledge. And yet, in this very example, just because he didn't know the rules of soccer didn't mean he knew nothing about anything and was just a total terrible loser, right? He brought the knowledge he had with confidence while also holding, right? You got to believe.
Right.
While also holding that there was a lot for him to learn. And he, as a character, embodied that didn't have to be threatening. And so as leaders, we have this opportunity to be able to say, just because I'm acknowledging to my team with humility, with openness, with curiosity, that there are things here I don't know, and I need help from my team on this because I do not know these things. Let's work together. Help me out. Like, we're going to be better because you, one of my other team members, is here. That doesn't mean that I'm an incompetent nincompoop that knows nothing about anything and is just bumbling around.
Because when we go back to it, from the very beginning of this episode, leadership is an action and a process. Mm-hmm. Being a leader isn't the position and the knowing, it's the action behind everything and the processes you go through, and you bring others with you and you empower them and you grow them, and you move an organization that way from within.
Yeah. If we can shift from fixed mindset to growth mindset. And if we can embody that it's our lives, our process is about the learning, not the knowing.
The learning, not the knowing. That was Mr. Rogers. Yeah. The learning, not the knowing.
I love that so much. So, any final thoughts as we wrap up our time together today?
I think it's worth acknowledging the fact that being a leader is difficult. It's hard work. It's a lot of heart work. It's a lot of reflection. And true reflection is not necessarily justifying the action, but really reflecting on the process.
Yeah.
And then looking at the people in front of you and the people that are working with you side by side and saying, and now I'm giving you this gift of space and voice and let's move this together.
Yeah. Oh, let's move this together. Yeah. I absolutely love that. When conflict is cliche, complexity is breaking news. And that's an Amanda Ripley quote. I'm thinking about the convergence of psychological safety and being able to be wrong, and how if we're able to be wrong in a way that is safe, we don't have to fear conflict. We don't have to fear being found out, being shown to have a limit, or having done something incorrectly, because we know it's just going to be a part of the process. So we don't have to defend or hide or think that people are going to drag us, right? So we are inviting our listeners to reflect today on what gets in the way of their learning and curiosity, and how we can cultivate fertile ground for growth and innovation and all of those things we really want as we live meaningfully into achieving our goals, rather than getting choked out by these weeds that can stifle us under the surface. So we are grateful to you for being a part of this movement of helping others in the workplace to enhance their individual and collective team performance. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist, and we hope you'll subscribe. Please contact us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom Press and productions and ask questions and give us suggestions for topics you'd like to explore or have us explore with you in future episodes. So that is how we're going to leave us for today. Thank you so much. Thanks, Maria, for spending time with me today.